California Gold Rush, 1848 to 1855 fueled migration and economic expansion. Introduction. Discovery of gold. In 1848, a discovery of gold in Coloma, California, set off one of the most significant events in American history, the California Gold Rush. This sudden influx of gold seekers, business entrepreneurs, and hopeful miners from across the United States and the world forever transformed California and the broader United States. The gold rush not only reshaped California's economy but also played a pivotal role in the westward expansion of the United States. The discovery, made by James W. Marshall at Sutter's Mill, sent shockwaves through the country. Almost overnight, news of the gold discovery spread, and people from all walks of life rushed westward, driven by the dream of striking it rich. 1. The beginning of the gold rush. Discovery at Sutter's Mill. In January 1848, James Marshall, a carpenter working for John Sutter, a Swiss immigrant and landowner, found gold flakes while building a sawmill along the American River near Sacramento. At first, Marshall tried to keep the discovery quiet, but word inevitably spread, and the idea of vast quantities of gold in California caught the imagination of the public. News of the discovery reached the East Coast in the spring of 1848. By the end of the year, people were flocking to California from all over the United States and beyond, hoping to find their fortunes. Global response. The 49ers arrive. As soon as the gold discovery became public, thousands of people, known as 49ers, a reference to the year 1849, rushed to California. The journey was long, dangerous, and costly, but it didn't stop people from coming. Some traveled by land, making a treacherous journey across the Great Plains and Rocky Mountains, while others took ships around the southern tip of South America or across the Isthmus of Panama. The first wave of prospectors was diverse, with people from all walks of life joining the rush. Immigrants from China, Mexico, South America, and Europe came, as well as Americans from the eastern states, seeking a new life and the possibility of striking it rich. By 1852, an estimated 300,000 people had arrived in California. 2. Economic impact of the gold rush. Immediate economic surge. The gold rush led to a dramatic and rapid increase in California's population and economy. As thousands of prospectors poured in, the demand for supplies and services exploded. Merchants, hotels, restaurants, and transportation services sprang up overnight to accommodate the new arrivals. The economic activity spurred by the gold rush transformed the state, creating new industries and opportunities for people willing to take risks. Towns and cities like San Francisco, which had previously been small settlements, grew rapidly into bustling urban centers. San Francisco's population swelled from a mere 1,000 people in 1846 to 25,000 by 1850. The construction of railroads and roads, as well as the expansion of shipping ports, provided the infrastructure needed to support the influx of people and goods. Mining. The search for gold. The methods of mining quickly evolved during the gold rush. Initially, prospectors used panning and placer mining, methods involving the use of a pan to sift gold from riverbeds and shallow deposits. As gold became harder to find, miners turned to more industrialized techniques, including hydraulic mining, which used high-pressure water jets to wash away soil and expose gold veins. While some individuals did strike it rich, the reality of mining proved difficult. Gold was often scarce, and finding it in significant amounts required hard work, perseverance, and luck. For every successful prospector, there were many others who left California empty-handed, their dreams dashed. 3. The social impact of the gold rush. Migration and demographic changes. The California Gold Rush was a major driver of westward migration, not only from the United States but from around the world. The population of California exploded, creating a melting pot of diverse cultures and peoples. However, it also led to tensions, particularly with the native populations. The influx of miners and settlers put pressure on California's Native American tribes, who were displaced from their lands and subjected to violence, disease, and exploitation. The gold rush led to the creation of the California statehood movement. In 1850, just 2 years after the gold rush began, California was admitted as the 31st state of the United States. The rapid growth of California as a state helped solidify the importance of the westward expansion in shaping the future of the United States. Social and environmental consequences. The gold rush also led to significant environmental degradation. Hydraulic mining, in particular, caused extensive damage to California's rivers and landscapes, as the technique often resulted in large amounts of debris being dumped into waterways, altering ecosystems and causing widespread erosion. On a social level, the gold rush created a volatile and often lawless environment. The rapid influx of people and the high stakes of gold mining created an atmosphere of competition, greed, and violence. Law enforcement struggled to maintain order, and many miners resorted to vigilante justice, leading to numerous conflicts and even race riots, particularly against Chinese miners, who were targeted by groups who feared competition. 4. Decline of the gold rush. Depletion of gold. By the mid-1850s, the easily accessible gold was becoming harder to find, and the initial frenzy of the gold rush began to fade. As the supply of surface gold dwindled, many miners left California in search of new opportunities. The state's economy began to shift away from gold mining and into more sustainable industries, such as agriculture, railroad construction, and manufacturing. While some individuals continued to prospect for gold, by the mid-1850s, the focus of California's economy had begun to change, and the gold rush itself became more of a historical memory than an ongoing phenomenon. Long-term economic transformation. While the gold rush's immediate effects may have been short-lived, the long-term impact on California and the United States was profound. The discovery of gold in California brought vast wealth to the United States, and the economic growth of the state was a critical part of the nation's transformation into an industrial power. California's economy eventually diversified beyond mining. Agriculture, including the cultivation of crops such as wheat and grapes, became a staple of the state's economy. Additionally, the gold rush fueled the expansion of the railroad system, which connected California to the rest of the United States, making it an integral part of the nation's economy. A defining moment in American history. The California Gold Rush of 1848 to 1855 was a transformative event that reshaped California and the United States. It drove westward migration, altered the country's economy, and played a central role in the expansion of the U.S. as a nation. The economic boom created by the gold rush helped establish California as an economic powerhouse, while the social and environmental consequences of the period served as reminders of the costs of rapid expansion. Though the gold rush itself was relatively short-lived, its legacy lives on in California's continued economic influence, its diverse population, and its central role in the history of the United States. The gold rush marked a moment in time when hope, ambition, and risk collided to shape the future of a nation. U.S. Civil War economic effects. 1861 to 1865 transformed the Southern economy. Introduction. The economic landscape before the war. Before the U.S. Civil War erupted in 1861, the Southern economy was deeply entrenched in agriculture, with a heavy reliance on slavery to sustain its profitable system of cotton production. Cotton, often referred to as King Cotton, was the South's primary cash crop, and the region's entire economy was structured around its production and export to European markets. The North, in contrast, had a more diversified economy, with a growing industrial base, a burgeoning infrastructure, and a booming manufacturing sector. As tensions between the North and South reached a breaking point over issues like slavery and states' rights, the Civil War became not just a political and military conflict but an economic one. The war would forever change the economic landscape of the South, transforming its agrarian-based economy and leading to the eventual collapse of the plantation system that had long defined the region. 1. The economic impact of war on the South. Blockades and disruption of trade. One of the earliest and most significant economic impacts of the Civil War was the Union blockade of southern ports, which began in 1861. The Union Navy sought to cut off the Confederacy's access to international markets, specifically Europe, where southern cotton was a major export. This blockade was extremely effective, severely limiting the Confederacy's ability to trade cotton and other agricultural products. The blockade meant that southern plantation owners could no longer rely on the same level of export income, devastating the South's primary revenue source. Cotton prices plummeted, and export markets in Europe, which had been the South's main economic lifeline, became inaccessible. The loss of slave labor. At the core of the Southern economy was its slave labor system. Slaves worked the vast cotton plantations, tobacco farms, and other agricultural enterprises, producing the goods that fueled the Southern economy. However, with the outbreak of the Civil War, the Southern states were drawn into a conflict that directly threatened the institution of slavery. As the war progressed, Union forces liberated significant numbers of slaves in Southern territories. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by President Abraham Lincoln in 1863, declared the freedom of enslaved individuals in the Confederate States. This not only undermined the economic foundation of the South, but also disrupted the agricultural workforce. The loss of slave labor compounded the region's economic crisis, as plantation owners struggled to maintain production without the forced labor they had long relied upon. Agricultural devastation. While the war's primary military battles took place in the North and South, the South's agricultural heartland was devastated by the fighting. Confederate armies frequently raided farms, destroyed crops, and disrupted food production. Sherman's March to the Sea in 1864, in which Union General William Tecumseh Sherman led his troops across Georgia, is one of the most infamous examples of the destruction wreaked on the Southern economy. Sherman's troops burned crops, destroyed infrastructure, and confiscated supplies, crippling the South's ability to feed its population and its armies. The South, already struggling due to the blockade and loss of slave labor, saw a further collapse of its agricultural output. Cotton production was particularly hit hard, as plantations were abandoned and fields lay fallow. By the end of the war, Southern agriculture had been severely disrupted, and much of its land was left in ruins. 2. The rise of Northern industry and economic dominance. Northern industrial growth. While the South's economy plummeted, the Northern economy was fundamentally transformed by the war. The Union's industrial base provided the North with significant advantages in producing the weapons, ammunition, and supplies needed for war. Factories in the North, particularly in cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago, ramped up production of war materials such as rifles, cannons, and uniforms. The war also spurred the growth of the railroad industry, as the North built extensive rail networks to move troops and supplies efficiently. This expansion of infrastructure helped the Northern economy grow during the war, providing new jobs and opportunities for businesses. The North was able to leverage its industrial power, making it the dominant economic force during and after the Civil War. The financing of the war. The Civil War required massive financial resources, and the North's industrial base allowed the government to secure funds in ways the South could not. The Union government used a combination of war bonds, taxes, and borrowed money to finance the war effort. The establishment of a national banking system in 1863 allowed for the creation of a standardized national currency, helping to stabilize the Northern economy. In contrast, the Confederate government struggled to finance the war. The South lacked a solid banking system and had no central authority to issue stable currency. As the war dragged on, the Confederacy resorted to printing massive amounts of paper money, which led to rampant inflation. By the war's end, Confederate currency had become nearly worthless. 3. Post-war Southern Reconstruction and economic recovery. The end of the plantation system. With the war's conclusion and the end of slavery, the South faced an economic and social crisis. The plantation system, which had been the backbone of Southern agriculture, was shattered. Without slave labor, plantation owners were forced to transition to a new labor system, such as sharecropping or tenant farming. These systems were often exploitative, with freed slaves and poor whites working the land under conditions that left them deeply indebted to landowners and merchants. The new system did little to revive the Southern economy in the short term. Cotton production did eventually recover, but it took decades to regain pre-war levels. Furthermore, the South remained economically backward compared to the more industrialized North. Reconstruction efforts focused on rebuilding the Southern economy, but these efforts were hampered by widespread poverty, lack of infrastructure, and resistance from former Confederates. The rise of new industries. While the war left the Southern economy in shambles, the post-war period did witness the emergence of some new industries. The South began to develop industries like textiles, iron, and railroads, although these industries were still small in comparison to those in the North. The expansion of the railroad network in the South helped facilitate trade and economic growth, but the South would remain largely agrarian for many years. 4. Long-term effects on the Southern economy. A shifting economic power. In the long term, the Civil War irreversibly altered the economic landscape of the South. The end of slavery, the destruction of the plantation economy, and the shift to a more industrialized North meant that the South's economic dominance in agricultural exports would never fully recover. By the late 19th century, the South's economy was still grappling with the legacies of the war, though it would slowly recover as it diversified and industrialized in the early 20th century. However, the South would never return to its pre-war economic status. Its agriculture remained reliant on cotton, but it lacked the industrial capacity to match the North. The post-war period marked a restructuring of the South's economy, with former slaves and poor white farmers continuing to labor under difficult economic systems. Economic transformation in the wake of the Civil War. The economic effects of the U.S. Civil War were profound and far-reaching. The Southern economy, based on slavery and agriculture, was devastated by the war and the loss of its labor force. The Union blockade, the destruction of infrastructure, and the end of slavery all contributed to the South's economic collapse. Meanwhile, the North's industrial economy expanded rapidly, becoming the dominant economic power in the United States. The Civil War ultimately set the stage for the Reconstruction era and the long, difficult process of rebuilding the South's economy. Though the war ended in 1865, its economic effects would continue to shape the South for decades to come, leaving an indelible mark on American society and history.